We are currently just going through a series about the National Autism Strategy, having started off with an introduction to it a couple of months ago. So today we're going to start looking at the diagnostic pathway, and we are fortunate enough to have two lovely people going to present in on what it is like to run a diagnostic service, and somebody talking about post-diagnostic services as well. So this is where we're at. So we started off with the introduction to the strategy in December, and we're now doing the diagnostic pathway, and then we're going to be following on with the other three throughout the year. It might be that we might change some in the meantime if something more urgent comes up, and a lot of the stuff that feeds into this comes from some voice groups that we hold with autistic adults across the East of England region, and so as we hear from them we respond to it, and we thought this was a good way of responding to quite a few areas, was by actually going through the strategy piece by piece. So today we are starting to look at the diagnostic pathway, and we've got Colin with us from the Adult Autism Service in Bedford, and he is going to be talking about what happens during the assessments and then all the issues faced with the diagnostic services and reasonable adjustments, and good and bad, to have quite an honest conversation with you. And then he's going to be followed by Shana, who is the Director of Adult Services for Autism Bedfordshire. And she's going to be looking at pre-diagnostic and post-diagnostic support, and looking at what a good post-diagnostic service can look like. So without further ado, if Annette has managed to get Colin able to be seen and heard, we are going to hand over to Colin. So,
good afternoon, everyone. My name's Colin. I'm a learning disability nurse by background. I've worked in the NHS in Bedfordshire for many years. Currently, obviously, with ELFT, and I'm the operational lead for the Adult Autism Service across Beds and Luton, which is the Adult Diagnostic Service. So do you want to go on to the next one? So I think I've got about 20 minutes. So I think I've got 5 slides to talk through, and as Heather said, any questions, post them in the chat and we can try and either I'll capture those as we go along, or in the Q&A session at the end. So a little bit of background about the service. So it was commissioned not long after the first National Autism Strategy came out, and went live in mid-2013. And initially there was myself and one psychiatrist trying to get the service set up, both of us part-time initially, and I was full-time within a matter of months, just because of the demand that was evident. So the service specification, we are a diagnostic service, and that's our core business. So across Bedfordshire and Luton, there are a few GPs get in who are from Hertfordshire, but they're under what was Beds CCG, now the ICB. So there's a few like cross borders. So we are a diagnostic service primarily for adults, and we are asked to also do short-term post-diagnostic, which at the moment is typically one appointment, just to look at answer any questions for people following diagnosis, try and signpost them onto other services and resources. Occasionally we will offer a few more appointments if people have particular specialist needs. We have got an OT in the team, so sometimes we do a bit more assessment around sensory integration issues, that's kind of negotiated on a case-by-case basis. There are key needs, but primarily we're trying to link people up to other services following assessment for their longer-term support needs, and that does include services like Autism Bedfordshire, who we have a really good working relationship with, and we also do training for other ELF clinical teams. I've done a lot of kind of training for team away days and things about autism, trying to raise awareness of autism, reasonable adjustments, comorbidity with mental health, all those kind of things. And teams contact us often just asking for advice. So our referral criteria, it says 18+. We don't have an upper age limit, so we have had people in their 70s. and everything in between. People just 17 in transition into adult services and everything in between. So very broad demographic in terms of age range, but also in terms of people's abilities. So there's no restrictions in our criteria about whether people have a learning disability, they're very high functioning, whether they're verbal, non-verbal, behavioural issues. If there's a sufficient rationale why they might be autistic, then we'll look at a referral. Obviously, with some of that, if people have got comorbid mental health needs or forensic backgrounds, we would look at having support from other services or agencies around some of those other issues alongside querying autism. And so we try to do a lot of networking and collaboration with other services and teams. So the stipulation is that people are living within the Bedston and Luton locality and with a local GP, because that's who we're commissioned by. We have had people we've had to negotiate around that. We've had people who are still registered locally, but they're going to university or they're coming back. So we try to be accommodating as much as possible with that. But yeah, you have to draw a line, but that people are living within our area as much as possible. And we do get referrals to people who already have a diagnosis, either from other teams asking this person needs support or asking us to review their needs. We do have to decline those because we are a diagnostic service, but we will try to give, whoever they've been referred by or other teams or the individual, will try and give them advice about the issues that have been raised in the referral, or where else they can go for support, depending on what it is that's being queried. But we are a diagnostic service only, so we don't work with people who already have a diagnosis. But as I say, we still try to be helpful, so we'll try and give people advice on where they can go or support with whatever the presenting issue is as much as possible. And as an adult service, we do need to be clear with referrers that the person is consenting and is aware of the referral to us. We can't drag them in and make them be assessed. Or, particularly with people with learning disabilities, if we get those, if it's evident they haven't got the mental capacity under the MCA to give consent for a referral, we can look at referrals which are made in best interest, as long as there's indication that that process has been looked at. And then we will then look at how's the best way to engage that person with an assessment, and not obviously with their carers or family. So again, we're always trying to strike a balance between being accessible but also managing increasingly high demand. So, but yeah, the criteria is, I think, it's still quite broad for what we do as a specialist team. So the team as it stands at the moment is myself. I'm full-time, and I'm kind of the manager for the team day to day, but I also do a lot of the clinical work within the diagnostic pathway. We have a senior occupational therapist who primarily does some of the post-diagnostic work at the moment, say particularly if they've got sensory integration issues, or if there's particular issues around kind of workplace and stuff. She might give advice to an employer about reasonable adjustments once the person's been diagnosed, that kind of thing. Have 2 senior clinical support workers who help do and I'll talk about our assessment process. So they help with kind of initial assessments and follow-up work with people. And we should have a psychologist, that's currently a vacant post. We have got a locum working some hours for us, but recruitment is one of the challenges that we've had, but I'll talk about that as we go through. So do you want to click on to the next slide, Heather? Hopefully that makes sense. So the kind of our service pathway, our assessment process has evolved over time, but essentially our framework's been fairly consistent. So we manage our own referrals. I know some teams referrals come through a single point of access within a larger service. We deal with our referrals directly, so we review those very carefully to make sure they're appropriate for us before they're accepted. We do get a lot, and I think I think at the minute we accept about 65% of referrals that we receive. So we are quite tough with the gatekeeping, and that might be about, is it clear they're asking for a diagnostic assessment for someone who hasn't already got autism? Are we giving enough information to indicate there are possible autistic traits to warrant that assessment? and again, checking things like have they consented, have they got other conditions, are they getting support from other services, all that kind of stuff we'll look at in terms of gatekeeping, and then we'll discuss them at our weekly team meeting. So that we review the referrals as they come in day by day, so then we discuss them all at our weekly MDT meeting. So people do get a very prompt response. And so initially with referrals that we accept, we send out a batch of screening questionnaires. The AQ is the autism quotient, which is quite widely used. There are different versions of that. So we have the AQ 50 because it has 50 questions on it. And we have a family version of that, which basically asks the same questions, but in the third person. So we like to try and get those from a family member or a carer to get someone else's perspective on the individual. The EQ is the empathy quotient. It's also sometimes called the Cambridge Behaviour Scale. And the other two questionnaires are ones of our own design. So one is asking about developmental history. So again, ideally from a parent or carer, a family member who knows them from a person from when they were a child. Or sometimes we get that from the person if the family's not available or they don't want them involved with whatever they can remember. But that talks about what they were like from their birth, early developmental milestones, childhoods, in terms of, kind of tracks the clinical domains. So asking about the early milestones in terms of motor and language development, what they were like socializing as a child, patterns of play, any other like medical conditions or diagnoses or health problems over time, interests and routines. So again, just trying to get a sense of, obviously the criteria for autism is a lifelong condition, so we want to try and get a sense very early on if whatever features they've got which warrant is querying an assessment for autism, whether some of those features have been evident throughout their life, or certainly from early childhood, because that will then help us inform what we would want to explore as part of our assessment process. So, and we also send out information about what people can expect from the service. So there's an information sheet which talks about the assessment process, who they're likely to see, how long appointments will take. So people have some idea what to expect, and we send out some bits and pieces of information as well. For referrals that we don't accept, we always write back to the referrer, and we always copy in the individual who's been referred and the GP if they're different to the referrer, to give feedback on why the referral wasn't accepted, and will give us signposting advice if that's appropriate. One of the common reasons that we don't accept referrals is if there's not enough information provided to indicate possible autism. But if we send those back, then we send our referral form, which gives much clearer prompts on what information we're looking for. And sometimes we do get people referred back again, and then we'll review that decision. And sometimes they're still declined, sometimes they are accepted. So again, we're not trying to, because often, particularly with GPs, we often get referrals that's on a GP's letter, which are sometimes very detailed, or they've got the kind of the right information that we're looking for. Sometimes they're very brief, but then sometimes the person will contact us and just say, well, I gave them a whole list of stuff because I've researched myself, or so that's not always passed over to us. So sometimes the person will then send that to us and we can review the decision with referrals declined. And as I say, or our referral form then gives prompts on the information that we're looking for. So again, we're still trying to strike that balance with being accessible to people if there is a rationale, but the adequate information has not been sent, that there's still a way to ask us to look at referrals again. And we get, I think we get, the last time I've checked, at least 6 or 10 a month that come back, ask us to look again at a referral that we've declined. So again, we're willing to do that if there's more information available. So the assessment process currently is typically in 3 stages. So once we've got the questionnaire back from people, we will offer an initial assessment, which is normally our 2 support workers. So that's very much not so much about querying are they autistic, it's about this is the information providing your referral, what's your current situation, because most people are getting referred to us because they've got support needs of some kind. It's not about I'm a bit curious. It's because whatever they're having, which are considered might be autistic traits, they're having struggles of some sort. So we like to try and clarify what the current situation is, what their concerns are, if they've got needs at the moment that aren't being addressed, either within their work setting or with another service, or with family support or on their own or whatever. So if they've got unmet needs or concerns that they feel aren't being addressed, then we'll try and give advice about what they can do with those, either themselves or, if they're open to another service, making recommendations of what they should be doing or asking what they are doing, or we can refer on to other services as well if we've highlighted there's a clear need here, you need support now, we can refer you on for that. So that's a key kind of aspect of the initial assessment, but we'll also explain more about this is what our service does, this is what you can expect in terms of next steps, possible timeframes for a next appointment, if they've got questions in the meantime, how they can contact us to ask, all those kind of things. And then from there, the next stage would be a clinical interview ideally with a doctor. So at the minute, we're quite short-staffed in this area, which is one of the challenges, but when we've been better staffed in the past, that we've had psychiatrists and psychologists working for us. So they use what's called the Royal College of Psychiatry interview schedule. It's got a very long title, but it's recognised and widely used by Autism Diagnostic Services. Gives a very clear outline and prompts on areas that need to be covered and which track the criteria for diagnosis, both with the individual and for other informants such as family. So that interview can take, it varies, but that can take up to 2 hours, sometimes longer, but we always book 2 hours for an appointment. So there is adequate time for a very comprehensive discussion, and we always encourage the involvement of family members or other informants. So that might be a partner, if an adult, if they've got grown-up children that they want to be involved, or they have carers or a friend, and that's twofold. In part, it's also because someone can add factual information to the assessment about how they think the person presents or what they struggle with, or just their observations over time. Because sometimes people say, we might ask someone, tell us about their, if they said they get social anxiety, ask them, well, tell us about what makes you anxious in those situations. They might talk about something, but a family member might say, well, actually, in that situation, from my perspective, you do this. So we can get that different perspective, but sometimes it's also just so the person's got some support. People can be very anxious coming into the clinic, meeting someone new for the first time, or even just, the journey, again, depending on what their issues are, which has prompted the referral in the first place. Anxiety can be a very, very common issue for any number of reasons. So sometimes even just having someone with them can be a big support. So again, we're very flexible with that. We'd much rather someone bring someone who's even just going to sit in the waiting room, but will drive them to an appointment rather than that they book it and then don't turn up because they're anxious. But equally, having that other informant who can contribute to the assessment can be really, really valuable. So we always look for that. And we encourage people to make them aware up front. If you want to bring people to your appointment, that's absolutely fine. We're happy with that. And people do ask, well, can I bring so-and-so with me, or do I have to come on my own? And so that's the common anxiety. So again, we're very mindful of those kind of issues, what people need to engage with us. And then the third stage of the assessment is normally with myself. Again, we book 2 hours for an appointment. It doesn't always take as long as that, but we like to allow that time. And the assessment I normally use is called an Autism Diagnostic Observation Schedule. It's been around a long time. It's a very evidence-based and structured assessment tool used in children and adult autism assessments. It can be useful. It can also have its limitations. So I don't always use that. And again, a lot of it in terms of our process, I will discuss with the doctor who did the previous assessment. Obviously what their impression was, what they think is covering at my appointment. And particularly during the pandemic, we became much more flexible with our process, so we were getting meaningful information rather than focusing on a rigid, this is how we do things. So I have done ADOS assessments. I've also just focused on exploring key issues with the people in more of another narrative interview. Or again, it's making sure that we're talking to a family member or someone who wasn't available with the doctor's interview, and so we're quite flexible with that. So like, what do we need from the next appointment? I mean, in some cases, the doctor will do the assessment and feed that to the team, and it will be a very clear-cut decision that the person fulfills criteria. So my assessment won't necessarily be booked if we don't think we need it. But we always book that second stage of a diagnostic interview for people where the doctor is unsure, or the doctor thinks, no, they're not autistic. So we always want to make sure that we do a robust assessment. So in those situations, I would always see the person as well. And then we'll discuss both parts of the assessment to get to a conclusion, see whether we both agree. And equally, if people have got very complex backgrounds, such as trauma, they've been under mental health services, other diagnoses, because there can be possible other explanations which might explain the presentation rather than autism. So again, we want to make sure we've done a robust assessment to make sure that we've explored all those different dynamics as thoroughly as possible before we make a decision and feedback to the person. So yeah, once we've discussed, so we never make a decision without discussing with the team as well, even if it is the doctor's, I'm absolutely certain this person's autistic. It always comes back to the team first to review all the information that we've got. And that will be information from the referral, any historical clinical records that we've got, anything else that the person or family provides through the assessment process, the questionnaires, the interviews that have been completed. We'll review it all to make a decision, even if we're fairly convinced it's a clear-cut case one way or the other. And then we'll always feed back to the person, or we'll ask them I always ask at my appointment, we'll explain what's going to happen next, and how do you want feedback. So we will always aim to give that feedback, at least with a decision, as quickly as possible, which we will then confirm in writing. So they've got something on a letterhead to say you got a diagnosis of autism or you haven't. Then we do a very comprehensive report and offer a follow-up appointment. So that's kind of the basic service model. Obviously, what happens within that can be quite complicated. But what we also do, even if if we ruled out a diagnosis, we always offer an appointment, which is normally myself. So our support workers tend to do the appointments as a follow-up where people have had a diagnosis confirmed, so they can talk through the report, any questions arising. Again, we'll give them signposts and advice on other services that might be useful to them, depending on what's come out of their assessment, or what questions they've got about what they think they need. So that tends to be a very person-centered conversation following a diagnosis. Where we've ruled out a diagnosis, people get offered to see me. They don't have to, because sometimes people accept that once they've got their report. Where they have questions, I will see them, because normally I've been involved in the diagnostic process anyway. And with that, some people will challenge it and say, well, I think you got that wrong. So we will talk through why we felt they didn't meet criteria. They can discuss whether we think we missed something or misinterpreted some information, which I can then review with the team whether we need to consider offering a second opinion assessment or just review our assessment that was completed. Or sometimes people are just asking, okay, so it's not autism, what's wrong with me, or what do I do next? So it's not always challenging the outcome, it's just asking for, well, I know I've got the difficulties, where do I go now, because I still need help. So I will try and have those conversations as well. And what I would say, and I've always reinforced to people when we have ruled out a diagnosis, particularly if they're unhappy with that, is that we're not diminishing that they have challenges or support needs. It's just that we're saying that autism isn't the answer to those issues. And the report does try to reflect how we've reached that conclusion. So sometimes people just want to know, okay, where do I go next then, or how do I get the support that I need? So again, for me, that conversation can be very person-centered, and what the person wants to bring to that discussion that I will then try and address with them and agree then next steps from there, depending on what we talk about. Right, I don't think any questions have popped up yet. So Heather, do you want to move on? So obviously we've been working for a long time now, and I'm sure everyone on the screen will be aware across services about the challenges through the pandemic and just increasing demand generally on services. We've been subject to that as much as anybody else has. But since we started, again, the service was very new. There was nothing else like it locally. So we were learning a lot from the outset about what people needed from us locally, what made a good service model. Obviously, we researched and looked at what other services which were established were doing that we could learn from. And obviously what commissioners wanted from us. But yeah, from the outset, we were always committed to learning from what we were doing in practice, and also service user feedback, to look at, are we getting stuff right? Is there stuff people think we're not getting right? Is there stuff that we can do better? How often are people not diagnosed with autism? In terms of the numbers that we're assessing, I think we're ruling out about 40%. So I think the majority are diagnosed, because I say we do screen very robustly from the outset to make sure that referrals are appropriate. But again, we get a lot of referrals now, people who've got quite complex needs or quite complex backgrounds. So often, sometimes with people, we are saying, yeah, there's stuff here which presents like autism, but we don't think that's the explanation. I mean, it can fluctuate a lot, and then people do come back and want to challenge. But it's about 60. Yeah, I mean, it depends. I mean, it's been as high as 70 or 80% that we've been diagnosing in the past. I mean, I was asked to do some stats recently over the last quarter, and it's about 60-40, but it does fluctuate. We don't have a service for young people before 18 at the minute. That sits with CAMS in Beds and Luton. Or if people or children are very young, local child development centre under the paediatric service. So there are pathways for assessment and diagnosis with children or young people, but for us it's people who are either 17 moving through transitioning into adult services, or people 18 plus. So that's our key focus. Yes, but as I say, we have learned a lot as we've been working, and the service has evolved. And obviously, as we've got established, these kind of questions do arise of getting established within how do we fit in with other services within the area, who does what. I will talk about the waiting time in a sec. That's definitely a challenge, so hold that thought. I mean, so obviously a big challenge that we all faced over the last few years was the pandemic. From March 2020, we had appointments lined up for people who had been waiting several months, and we had to cancel those with days' notice, unfortunately, because we were just told you can't see people face to face. And at one point, we were having update meetings 3 times a day about what was going on with the pandemic and updated guidance from the government and NHS England. But we worked really hard in the first couple of months after the pandemic started. Hit us really hard in like March 2020 to look at evolving. Some services within the trust staff got redeployed, so they just shut down completely. We remained operational throughout, but we had to adapt our process a lot, and we did a lot of networking with other teams. So we did a lot of assessments via video call, but also telephone interviews. And as I say, we've become increasingly creative with the process to make sure that we were doing a robust assessment. So as a comprehensive assessment, as I said on the previous slide, assessments typically are over 2 stages. So it's the clinical interview with the doctor, and then a further assessment with myself. So as I say, that could be the ADOS, or that could be a different focus, like another clinical interview if it's trying to explore key issues. But then we would also want to talk to family or third-party informants. So if they weren't available at both those appointments, we would try and talk to those separately to clarify if we thought there were gaps in what we were trying to cover. But we would ask people if you've got old school reports or any other medical history, previous assessments, because a lot of people that we have seen have been under CAMS when they were younger, or paediatric services, or having under adult mental health. So if we can access records, we'll review that stuff as well to try and get a sense of history and look at what's been happening over their lifespan. But we'll also ask people if they've got other records that we can't access. Let's have a look. So we'll review as much information as possible if people have it available, or we can access it, which might be relevant. As the pandemic progressed, obviously guidelines kept changing, so we were very flexible with that. So when we were able to do face-to-face assessments, we were trying to introduce those back in, even as part of an assessment, as well as doing remote interviews. I mean, ROT was doing some assessments of people even out when we could see people, but only outdoors. She saw some people walking around a park, social distancing, but even trying to do some observations with them and stuff in community settings. So we did assessments with people in village halls, where we could keep socially distancing close to where they live, so they didn't have to travel. Just we were very, very flexible. But the core business is actually trying to cover between a doctor and another clinician, at the moment, particularly myself, working through gathering enough information to track whether the person fulfills criteria. So the interview and the ADOS that's the key, that's the baseline, if you like. But yeah, we've expanded other strategies to gather information over time. And we've always been very open to that with people. If there's other, even after an appointment, we said, if there's stuff that occurs to you after your appointment that you don't think was discussed, or it occurred to you subsequently, we said to them, you can email us and say, we'll add that to our notes and we'll review it. So we've always been very open to people. People often say, well, is this relevant? And we said, we'd rather hear something that it might not be, but rather than miss something that could be important, we encourage people to share as much information as they can from different sources. So, I mean, ELFT as a trust is very committed to a process called quality improvement, and there's a whole a QI team who supports clinical teams with implementing a QI process to do projects to review complex problems or looking at ways to improve different aspects of what we do as services, which can be anything. We've done 2 projects in recent years, which both lasted several months at a time, to look at how to manage our waiting list and trying to help people move through the service pathway as expediently as possible. And all teams do that. I mean, there's lots of resources and tools available within the QI team and the process that you can use to try and analyse what you're doing, look at trying out small changes, testing those, and if they work, then making those more part of day-to-day practice, or if they don't work, trying something else. So we've done a lot of that work as within the QI process, as well as this ourselves listening to feedback, reviewing what works and what doesn't. And since the pandemic eased and the restrictions eased, we worked really hard to reintroduce face-to-face assessments. We have still had a lot of restrictions with what you can do, where you can see people, use of PPE, but we've adapted as time's gone on to be compliant with the guidance that we've got and still able to see people. And again, we've been quite creative with that, like having one-way systems coming in and out of clinic buildings, giving people lots of information about what they need to take into account in terms of PPE, ringing people first to do welfare checks, that they're fitting well, they're not testing positive. We were testing ourselves. So again, very robust processes while still trying to be operational and accessible to people. So there's always been that juggling act to try and meet these different demands, wherever it's come from, demand on the service or like these other issues outside of our immediate control that we need to respond to. But yeah, we learned a lot from the pandemic as well. So we are still offering people routinely the option to have a remote appointments if they find that easy to engage with. And one of our locum psychologists who's been working with us recently only does remote assessments. So she's often done the clinical interview like this on a screen, but then people are then meeting me face to face. So we've got quite a blended approach to assessments, which has worked really well. And because I found certainly you can pick up some quite different stuff with people sitting in a room. Particularly doing an ADOS, you can't do an ADOS over a video. Other teams have tried adapting different methods. Or even just sitting having a discussion, an interview, you can get very different things sitting in a room compared to being online. So yeah, within that, I always ask people, how did your video appointment go? Did the tech work? Were there any connection problems? Was the quality of the audio and the video okay? Because sometimes they were factors depending on people's Wi-Fi connection. So again, making sure that if that impacted on the information we were getting, we would look at either trying to do that again or revisiting areas and making sure that we covered the bases as robustly as possible. And again, if that meant more appointments, then we would look at doing more appointments, although we're under pressure with a waiting list. Once people are being seen, we want to make sure that assessment is good enough, particularly if we get to an outcome that the person wants to challenge. Because some of the challenges have been, well, I didn't get asked the right questions, or the actual video was quite poor. How can you make that judgment over a screen? So there was a question about waiting times. Our waiting time, waiting list has grown, which is I think consistent with national trends, and we've networked with other teams. And that's one of the reasons why we reintroduced the initial assessment last July. At the minute, our waiting time to get to see a doctor for a diagnostic assessment is getting on to 2 years. I know there are teams where that's higher, and there are some which are doing better than that, but that's unfortunately, that's not unusual in terms of the national picture, I don't think, but we're not complacent with that. But what we are seeing, and we've been doing a lot of work recently with a capacity demand review, that the demand we're seeing in terms of referral rate has been steadily climbing for a long time. Currently, we're getting about 55 to 60 referrals a month, which thank you, Ruth, it is. Yeah, and I say we're gatekeeping referrals really robustly, but we're still accepting 35 to 40 referrals a month typically, which is beyond the capacity that we've got. So our list is growing, and we are trying to look at ways to manage that. So yeah, we're working hard with the initial assessment or with the doctor assessment. If there are opportunities to screen people out or reach a decision reliably, then we will do. If people don't engage with appointments or they don't send back questionnaires, we will chase them, but we'll also look at then discharging them because they're not engaging, to try and free up those slots for other people. And again, if they get re-referred or they get back in touch and just say, well, I never received your appointment letter or something, we'll discuss that. And we'll try and be as responsive to if people raise concerns why they haven't engaged as possible. But again, it's still a challenge. But yeah, we are trying to find ways to even move people through the process or discharge them from the list if they're not engaging, so we can make sure that we're optimizing the resource that we have. But it is a challenge. So we are. Do I want on to the next slide here? I know I'm probably over time, but I think this is probably the last one.
Yeah, I think we just need to move on a little bit
quickly
to let Charlotte have a go.
Yeah, so just give a sense of some of the stuff that we have been doing. Since July last year, when we first started, we always used to do an initial assessment, and then the service model got changed into just the diagnostic call 2 assessments a few years ago. We reintroduced the initial assessment in July last year because people were waiting longer to see a doctor for a first appointment. And as I say, that's primarily looking at people's current support needs, risk assessment, giving them signposting information, and referring them on to other services to support right then while they're waiting to see us again. There was also a pilot scheme with some additional funding that got given for 12 months for a pre-diagnostic offer with colleagues in our recovery college to do workshops to people on our waiting list. So that was focusing on key topics which can be common to people who are possibly autistic. Very clear that it wasn't about people who are going to be diagnosed, but it was about managing anxiety, managing being on a waiting list, isolation, a number of topics. And we would promote that offer with people with the information that first goes out to them with the questionnaires, but also at the first appointment, we would say, you're going to wait a while now for a doctor, but we can offer you this in the meantime. So there was something that people could access, and people who have accessed that, we've been told, feedback's been generally very good. There have been some people who have said, no, don't want to do that. I don't like groups. But again, that is something that we're hoping will carry on in some shape or form, either with the recovery college or with another provider, because it has proved beneficial, or we certainly think so. So again, I know there are discussions again, it's always about funding, isn't it? If you want to try and sustain a project or start a new project, but we know it's something that's worked well. We do also, me personally, have done a lot of training for other, particularly mental health teams, to try and make sure they are accessible to people with other mental health needs or support needs. And we also, just discuss with them about reasonable adjustments, or if they've got people who are autistic already, Colin, how do we work with this person? We're struggling. That we can try and give them advice for people that they are already working through are autistic. People referred against their wish. Not if it's evident to us that they didn't agree to refer, then we won't accept it. Sometimes they're referred and it hasn't occurred to them before they might be autistic, or they might not think so, but they've agreed to the referral. So again, we'll discuss that stuff at the first appointment. And if they're clear they don't want to go forward, then we'll say that's fine, you don't need to, and then we'll discharge them if that's their choice. I mean, a lot of times people think will say they've actually been wondering for quite a while themselves, or to them it makes sense, so they're happy or they're willing to be referred. Some people, it's been proposed to them by a clinician rather than them considering it themselves. But once it's been suggested to them, often people are very keen to, yeah, I'd like to get clarity now it's been asked. Was the pre-diagnosis? So I'm not quite sure. Yeah, might have to clarify that question for me. But I do so with mental health teams, if they are working with people who are autistic already with mental health needs, they do struggle sometimes. Well, people will feedback and say, like, mental health team doesn't understand my autistic needs, or they're not good at making reasonable adjustments. So we'll try and give people advice. I think so. I mean, the pre-diagnostic group was always focused as being very small, because a lot of people just say don't like groups. So it was always only like for each session would be pitched at like half a dozen people. I mean, the project is nearing the end of its year now, so they're looking at doing a review at the moment to collate, did it work, didn't it work, what's the feedback like? So I'm hoping we'll get an update on that in the next couple of months, so it can be evaluated. So hopefully we'll be able to update on that in the future. Yeah, sorry, Heather, I'm going to stop in a sec. There was just one example I wanted to give, because we do get positive feedback from people. And sometimes is that going the extra mile, or to me it's just sort of like, I'm a nurse, I want to be helpful to people. And we had a guy referred to us very recently, or at the time he contacted, we hadn't had his referral, and he was very disillusioned with the mental health team, didn't think they were supporting him. He's got ADHD and other mental health needs, having a lot of problems at work. He spoke to me on the phone, and I told him what a waiting list was like, and he nearly had a meltdown. But what he was saying was his key issue was he's having problems with at work. He's definitely got massive sensory integration problems, hyperacusis, which is auditory sensitivity. He's a lorry driver and has to go into the staff canteen to have his breaks, and it drives him mad, and he has angry outbursts, and his boss won't do anything in terms of reasonable adjustments until he gets a diagnosis. But he's already got ADHD, and I said, well, this could be part of your ADHD. You've got a diagnosis of that. So I said, I write him a supporting letter to say he's on our list for an assessment. The referral we did get very detailed, and there's lots to indicate he's very likely autistic, as well as having ADHD. And I said, I'll do a supporting letter for you while you're waiting for us. And I'll say them, that could be part of your ADHD, which is established, and they should consider reasonable adjustments. For him, even going sitting in his lorry cab outside in the car park to eat lunch would be fine, but they won't let him. So, and he thought that was amazing that I would do that for him. And I thought, like, well, it's no big deal, really. But sometimes it is those little things can make a big difference to someone. So that's now on my to-do list. But he was just grateful even just being listened to. So sometimes it's not about doing big clinical stuff that can make a difference to someone. And now, Heather, I'm going to stop. There have been some questions. Yeah, I mean, Heather's got my contact details, so if people want those, she can share those around.
I will do, yes.
Yes, so
yeah, so we'll send the email out with all the links and everything, if that's okay, Colin. But thank you. I'm just aware that the time has really gone by.
Yeah, I'm really sorry. Sorry, Shauna.
So if people are able to stay on, that would be really good, please.
Yeah, I'll stay on too. So
thank you. So I'm now going to introduce you to Shauna, and hopefully she's coming on right now. So over to Shauna to talk about pre and post diagnostic support.
Lovely, thank you, Heather. So as the slide says, I'm Shauna Rain. I'm the Director of Autism Bedfordshire, and I oversee services for autistic adults across Bedfordshire, Hertfordshire and Milton Keynes. So Heather, if you could take me on to the next slide, please. And then the next slide. So first I'm going to be talking to you about pre-diagnostic support, and then I'm going to take you through post-diagnostic support and then general services that can be useful. I'm going to try and do this in 10 minutes so that you're not all overrunning, because I appreciate that I imagine most of your diaries are like mine, where literally you are blocked out constantly. So we'll try and keep within the time frame. So as of April 2023, we're going to be running a series of online workshops for people that are on the diagnostic pathway. As Colin said, the current referral pathway is about 2 years in terms of waiting list. But actually, when we look at the East of England as a whole, that's actually really quite good. There are some places that are up to 5 years. And as you can appreciate, if you're waiting to find out whether you're autistic or not, that can mean that you are kind of left feeling like, well, what support can I get right now? And actually, the idea of having pre-diagnostic support is meant to act as an intervention. And there are supports available to you. So we've been commissioned to run workshops. So we've created 4 workshops that are going to be running. So am I autistic? Understanding the assessment process, expectations of receiving a diagnosis or not, feelings you may have while waiting for the diagnosis, and how to manage them. Now, the one thing I want to be really clear on is that when someone is waiting for their diagnosis, we are not going to be teaching them how to be autistic. And it's really important that you don't start talking about autistic traits and how you're managing them. And that's because when somebody gets to the point of meeting, say with Colin, who you've just met, you don't want to have the wrong information go across to somebody and somebody receiving a diagnosis of autism, but actually they aren't autistic. But in the same breath, it is really important to make sure that there is an intervention of support available to that person. So these are the workshops. Heather, if you could take me on to the next slide. Lovely. So some of the other interventions that you guys might want to consider, and this is something that we're doing, is we offer a helpline. So if somebody rings us and they are still waiting for they've been on the waiting list a year, they've had that appointment that Colin said about, but actually they're having issues with going to the dentist and they're not sure what to do, we can actually take that phone call and support that person. They might ring us and say they're really struggling to manage their anxiety, so we can signpost them to an appropriate service. That person isn't left feeling alone. So we might signpost them to mine, we might signpost them to the GP and have a referral made to the wellbeing service. But having that support available to somebody is invaluable, especially at a time where they just don't understand what's going on. And then a one-to-one. So this is something that this is something Colin's team currently do, that I would ask that every team do, is having that one-to-one to make sure that appropriate interventions are taking place. If somebody is at risk of serious mental health issues, but actually there's nobody intervening because they're not open to social services, and actually the only thing they have had is one-to-one to find out whether they might be autistic or not, those things need to take place, and those checks we need to make sure those checks are happening so that people aren't being missed. Head up, next slide please. Other resources that you might want to consider. So a resource hub for professionals. Too often or not, professionals don't understand where support is. And that's simply for the fact that our services are huge. There's so much for professionals to know and be able to signpost to, but actually by having a guide that's made available to professionals about where support is available for autistic people, they can refer to that, go straight to the information that they need to make that referral. We recently finished one for BLMK as part of the workforce strategy stuff that I've been working on, and Hertfordshire have actually also invested in this project, and that will be available in the summer. And it, like I say, it is a resource hub made available for professionals, and it just stops them having to do all the research and gives them back that valuable time so that they can support the person quicker into services. At point of referral, make them being referred aware of what support is available to them. So if the GP is referring them to the adult diagnosis team, actually could the GP be saying, right, if you're struggling with this, you can go here, here and here. The GP doesn't necessarily have that time, so we need to make sure we're preparing that information for our health and social care providers so that they again can signpost quickly to make sure the autistic person isn't left without something, or the possible autistic person. Explains those on the waiting list that they also have right to choose. I was going to talk about right to choose, but I just don't have time now, and I don't want to take up time so you guys miss out on other things, but please do Google right to choose. It's really important, especially where you've got a waiting list for up to 5 years. And actually that person can choose to go online and go through Psychiatry UK. It can speed up that referral process, meaning they're not waiting for 5 years if it's accepted. And creating drop-in sessions. This is something we're actually piloting in BLMK and Hertfordshire in the next 12 months. And it's a session for people to come and find out how to get a diagnosis. So many adults don't know where to go to get that diagnosis. So we're going to be marketing these everywhere. And if you think that you might be autistic or you've got questions or you're on the waiting list, you can come to those, and they're going to be in person and online. And it's just another way for someone to get that support that they need. Next slide, please. Lovely. Now I'm going to talk to you about post-diagnostic support. So Heather, if we could move on to the next slide. I've been really lucky in the last 12 months to be working with Colin and his team and working with people who recently received their diagnosis. But in the last 18 months, we've been delivering something called the Understanding My Autism courses. So these courses have 6 to 8 people attending, and they're people that have recently received their diagnosis. However, we do not limit it to people that have only just received their diagnosis, because one person's journey is one person's journey, and we don't get to dictate to somebody when they feel comfortable to discover that diagnosis and talk about it with other people. And actually for some people, they need to revisit these things because things change, and it's really important that we don't say, right, you've had this course once, actually you might need to go back on it in 2 years' time or even 6 months' time, because not everything's come through and it takes you longer to process information. So completely open. So some of the topics that we cover are listed here. I think the key thing is to look at is autistic strengths. We really want to help people celebrate and feel proud of the fact that they're autistic and have so much to give the world and so much to share. And actually, it's not just about building interventions, it is about self-love as well. So if we could move on, Heather. Thank you. So just going back to what I was talking about with Colin at the start, so the one-to-one post-diagnostic support. So we deliver anything from 8 to 12 sessions, depending on the person that we're supporting, and we can actually do basically whatever this person wants to in these sessions. It can be online, it can be in person, it can be in a cafe if that's what the person wants, but it's really about making it person-centered and not, again, dictating, right, you've just received your diagnosis, so here are the 5 key areas we're going to look at. That's just not how it works. And it's really about making sure that you understand the individual that you're working with, and you give them lots of options, but you have to have flexibility of thinking as the professional. And actually, when you start discussing something with somebody, helping them explore how they really feel about that and building a support plan around that and adapting it, but making sure that person understands it. Heather, if you could just go on to the next slide, but I have highlighted some of the key areas that we do look at when we are talking about one-to-one post-diagnostic support. So managing difficult emotions. Now, receiving your diagnosis can actually be, for some people, the worst thing in the world because they never thought they were autistic, but for some people it's the light bulb moment where suddenly everything is making sense, and that's why I do what I do. But again, for somebody else, it's well, what does that mean? And we have to explore all of those things with that person. So problem-solving strategies, again, that's an ambiguous statement. For every single person we work with, it's so different, and it's about what works for them. It might be that we need to make a weekly plan for that person, but it's made for them and it's fit for purpose only for them and could never be shared for somebody else because we've used their personal interests to create it so that it makes sense to them and it relates to them as the individual. For some people, it's kind of around those making reasonable adjustments at work and actually managing their time in the workplace better because they might be struggling with, like Colin quite rightly pointed out, lunch breaks, and what do we do at lunch breaks, and us supporting them with managing those and making them aware of what other support's available. Sometimes it's about filling out the needs assessment forms for local authorities and making sure that actually the right support is in place, because too often not people go without the support that they so desperately need, and we're there to support them and make sure that those things are done, because let's be honest, we know that all the forms that we have to do for health and social care can be quite, there's just so much information, and actually you've just been told you're autistic and you struggle with processing too much information, but then there's so much information you've got to do and fill out because that's the support and that's the only way that you can get it. So actually having somebody who can break it down and take it step by step with you can actually really help and support you to make sure you've got that and your rights are being respected and listened to, and really helping you understand how to manage things on a day-to-day kind of thing. Heather, next slide please. This is just some of the feedback that we've had in the last year of the pilot for the one-to-one post-diagnostic support. I'm just going to move on quickly from that because you can see the results have been absolutely phenomenal. Here are 2 of the quotes. I'll just give you guys a minute to read those. I'm not going to read them for you. But there is a 30-page report that I finished writing, which will be available. It's currently with the Assistant Director of Health at the moment, just to be signed off. But it will be made available on the website and available to everyone to read once she's confirmed she's happy with it. But yeah, next slide, please. One of the other things that we also offer is a post-diagnostic peer support group in Hertfordshire, and this really is open to people that have received their diagnosis in the last 12 to 18 months, and it's a place for autistic people to come together and actually share personal experiences. You know, these are the strategies that I've been using. What do you use? And actually helping people build relationships and friendships in a really healthy, safe way. Next slide, please. Resources again to consider. I'm always going to bang on about the resource hub for professionals because we know that professionals really struggle with understanding where to signpost people. It's not that they don't want to, they just don't know where that information is. And a resource hub available for autistic people. Imagine if there was a website that you could go to that really broke everything down for you about every little thing, whether it be masking or stimming or coping with anxiety, and you've got videos that you can watch in your own home at a time that works for you, rather than it being an appointment you've got to remember everything that we went over. It's something that's about autistic people for autistic people in a time and space that works for autistic people, rather than it being something that's made by health and social care professionals in a time that works for them. It's about really, again, making it person-centred. Peer support is huge and invaluable. Drop-in sessions, again, for autistic people to get some help and support. Helpline, again, if you are autistic and you need to know where to go to get information, you need someone to talk to. Sometimes you might not want to access core services or support that's available because you just have a question, but you need that place to go to ask that question. Our helpline in Bedfordshire and Hertfordshire is absolutely insanely busy. I've had to have people working on it now. When I started working the charity 10 years ago, it was shared between the team. That is not a possibility anymore. I have to have somebody who works on it 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, to answer the amount of calls that come in to support the autistic community. And it is open for professionals. And better support for health interventions and support. I think we all can kind of gather what I mean here, and it's around the training aspect. We know that lots of health and social care professionals really do want to help, but they haven't necessarily been given the right training to help them to do so properly. And if we could really support health and social care with lots of different training to help them make reasonable adjustments, help them understand sensory needs, communication needs, things would just be so much better. And it's, every time we put something on, we see hundreds of health and social care people come, and it shows us how much you guys really do want to learn. So just a big thank you. Next slide, please. I'm nearly finished, I promise, we're getting through it. So these are just some slides about what services we offer where. So I'm not going to break those down for you, but this is the stuff in Bedfordshire, the stuff in Milton Keynes, and then in Hertfordshire is the next slide. And thank you.
Thanks, Shauna. You did that so quick. Thank you very much. So I'm just going to, before we finish, these links will be getting sent out to you, but I just want to read, it's not a quote, it's too big to be a quote, from somebody who's been through post-diagnostic support, just to show how invaluable it can be for somebody as they're coming to terms with the diagnosis. So the post-diagnostic support has been an absolute blessing and so needed. On initially getting my diagnosis, I was relieved, but within months, I felt so much grief regarding the challenges being autistic posed to me, and that I would always be autistic. Autism Hertfordshire and the one-to-one sessions have given me hope and allowed me to thrive and not just survive. Not feeling alone without support or very many autistic peers was so difficult and debilitating. That is not my reality now. Through being helped to understand myself better and my experience of being autistic, I have grown massively in confidence and been my own unique, authentic self without using energy up trying to mask all the time, and I feel positive about the future. Less than 6 months ago, I was in the midst of a mental health crisis, largely resulting from autistic burnout and not understanding why I was back there again. Now, largely due to the support of Autism Hearts and the post-diagnostic service, which has allowed me to better access and use other services such as the mental health team, I am positive, proud and heading into full-time employment with confidence and fitting accommodations being made. I'm able to advocate for myself and ask for help, and have been signposted to good people and good organisations that I can draw on. I no longer solely focus on the struggles that being autistic poses and can see and use the many great strengths I have. On top of that, I have made lots of new friends, have a better support network around me, and know what my goals are and how I am going to enjoy life. A weight has been lifted, and finally I feel happy to be alive, be me, and to use my skills and experiences to help others. This service is so valuable, and I and many others like me need fitting and high quality support like this to sustain us in thriving and experiencing joy and well-being. Without a service like this, it is so easy to feel lost, isolated and ill-equipped to face life, resulting in poor physical and mental health and large costs to the individual and society. Thanks to the support I had, I now believe in myself and have energy, enthusiasm and skills to ride out the storms and enjoy life. So I just wanted to leave you with that, and this will also be getting sent out to you, just to show what a difference it can make, and obviously can be quite preventative in money being spent elsewhere in the future, helping somebody that has gone into crises. So that is it for today. Our next meeting is on the 7th of June, and we are going to be looking at transitioning from children's to adult services. If in your area you have got good practice in this, please let us know. So, and if you would be willing to talk about it, please do get in touch, because we really do want to include as many areas as we possibly can. So again, thank you for joining us today. Sorry we've run over a little bit, and thanks to Colin and to Shauna, and you know, it's great to just have professionals along being able to talk about their experiences. We will send out Colin's email address to you, and you will have autism beds if you need to contact us as well. So thank you again. Enjoy the rest of your day, and hopefully we will see you at the next one. Thank you very much, and bye for now.